Okay, good evening. Oh. Feedback on that.
Josh knows what he's up to.
Okay, I think I
You're good?
Oh, I thought it was the speaker back there.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're good now. Yes, we had some feedback. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. The January 9th, 2025 meeting of the Corvallis School Board is called to order at 6:30 p.m. In the interest of public health and safety for all community members, especially for immunocompromised individuals and their families, the Corvallis School Board will continue to offer a virtual option for board member and district personnel participation. Additionally, public comment is available at some meetings, both in person and virtually. Information about providing public comment is available on the Corvallis School District website. The board packet, or board agenda and packet, as well as the link to the district YouTube channel are available on the school board page on the district website. Public meetings are live streamed on the district's YouTube channel, and a recording is posted to the same channel typically the day after the meeting. Tonight we have all board members in attendance, and the first item on the agenda is board member reports. And before we did that, I wanted to say welcome back, everybody, from winter break. And it's good to see everyone, and hope it has been a smooth week for everyone. So anybody have any reports? Do you have a, go ahead, Sammy?
One report I have is the library invited us to, the library, a librarian in CV invited us to join, and I was really honored to shadow the library and take a tour, the work, and understand the work that they do, and also understand the workload and the impact that libraries have on our students as a sanctuary and place for them to learn and grow and find their passions. And I was assigned some volunteering duty, including changing the setup from one monthly setup to another, so they celebrate different cultural months. For example, in December, I believe, or November, it was the Native American, and there was a setup for books. Then they volunteered me to take out about 60 books for one of my favorite books, The Pilgrimage by The Pilgrim by Paulo Coelho. Mm-hmm. And it was really cool to take a part of that experience and understand the impacts that our libraries do. And it really informs my understanding of the important budgetary decisions we make.
Thanks, Sammy. Anybody else? Judah?
I'd just like to thank the Bridges program for inviting us to their holiday party. And I saw Shauna and Chris there and got to see some really beautiful art. And they had an excellent spread of snacks. So thank you so much for the invitation. It was a really fun party.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I wish I could have been there too. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, two things. I know that there was a lot of comments after our last meeting with the elementary principals and their presentations. But I just wanted to say it again early in our meeting today that I just so appreciated listening to their plans and just feel that we have such a dynamic group of elementary principals who are very knowledgeable and dedicated to making it right for all kids. So I just wanted to compliment that. And then also I just wanted to congratulate Dr. Whitebear and her the election for our regional OSBA person, and just appreciate you doing all that work. I feel like you're one of those people that walks the talk. Like you say, things need to be done, but you're in the front making it happen. I just really appreciate that.
Thanks, Chris. Okay. That was part of my report too. Thank you for segueing into that. Oh, do you have one too? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good.
Thank you, Judah. You reminded me of the Bridges celebration. So just wanted to also second my thanks to Bridges staff for inviting us, as well as the students and the families who were there too, for sharing their artwork, sharing food. We had a student-led tour, which was really wonderful to see how the space was being used in such a thoughtful and trauma-informed way to really meet students' needs and families' needs. So appreciated being there and invited into that space.
Okay, go ahead, Sean, or Therese.
Right before the break, I had an opportunity to meet with some of the math instructors at Linus Pauling, and it was really educational for me to see how they're approaching instruction around the varying levels of abilities that students have in classes. And so I was just really encouraged that there's just a lot of thoughtfulness in the planning. And if you are curious about how our math teachers are approaching math, I can't promise you that they're going to have time to email you back right away, but I do think they like to get questions and they like an opportunity to explain the methods that they are using. So reach out. I found it really insightful, and I have to say, it was fun to be in an algebra class again. So.
Okay, so I was able to go to Delta last night with Bernie and spend some time with that group, and it was really great conversations, and I'm looking forward to the work that's coming out of Delta, coming up with conversations with the community. And as Chris had mentioned, I was elected as the Region 10 Lynn Benton Lincoln representative on the Oregon School Board Association, and so I'm looking forward to serving the community in that capacity and also making connections across the counties with different districts and the ESD board and community college boards as well. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And I was also elected as the president of the member of color caucus for OSBA as well. And so looking forward to moving that work forward, especially with the legislative long session ahead and some of the work we're looking forward to with that. So that's it for board member reports. And the next one is the Oregon School Board Association and National School Boards Association updates. And Sammy?
Thank you, Chair. So as a reminder, these are frequent updates that I shared throughout the last couple of years. And by December 31st, I concluded my service as the president of Oregon School Board Association. And in the reports that I shared with you, I amended also the reports I shared with the board reflecting on the year. Usually the OSBA board meets 4 times, and I believe we met around 17 times or something like that. Huge movement that we have done together, and I want to thank you, especially as my colleagues and the community, for their support that made this progress possible, including great news that we have heard by the end of the election. The passage of the resolution that supported the increase of the dues in a way that catches up with inflation and with the needs. For 25 years, we have not done that, and I shared the schedule here in this packet as well as a reminder for the good work that we do. This will definitely ensure that the service and help that I got and we continue to get from OSBA is going to be accessible and available for years to come, and hopefully in perpetuity with this resolution, keeping after 15% increases for the next 5 years, keeping up after that with the CPI. Definitely those investments are going to help us advocate for the kids. In addition to the report of OSBA, I shared with the National School Board Association. They were on break, but I will take a moment here to highlight an act that has passed the House and now is going to the Senate, and we may talk about it briefly maybe in the comments at the end of this meeting, but I want to bring to your attention the Lakin-Riley Act. It was passed, but unfortunately, in my opinion, and with bipartisan support from the House, it will definitely be a concern for our students and families who are undocumented, and probably, in my opinion, will have an impact on Oregon's sanctuary status if this passes. So more on that to come. We're trying to assess what is the impact and the viability of advocating on the Senate side to bring awareness to it. On a positive note, I want to transition to really acknowledge the news that was just shared. Dr. Lahui Whitebear being elected to Oregon School Board Association as the Len Benton Lincoln representative brings huge value, and we voted for her to represent us, and the majority of the region agreed with that. I just want to highlight how much Lahui have shared her values and walked the walk. And I'm not exaggerating by saying within the last couple of months only, while she decided to run, the impact of that and way that she communicated with boards and showed up to boards activated our region districts and their boards of education to be more involved than I ever seen since I joined this board in 2017. So really congratulations for this region, our chair's election. And also I want to share, I talked with the chair that this report now will be a mutual work between me and the chair, so she can share OSB updates and I'll share that as the immediate past president and also add the national updates. So with that, happy to answer any questions, but truly I want to say thank you for the progress that you have contributed to that you see in the report here.
Any questions for Sammy? Okay. Thanks, Sammy. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report, so I'm gonna hand over to Ryan.
Sounds good. So just a couple things to highlight. The first one is that January is School Board Recognition Month. We will recognize you with more time on the agenda at our next meeting, but just to make sure that folks know that this month as a whole is a month when we recognize the work of our school board, who are dedicated volunteers who give hours and hours of their time to the benefits of our students and to our staff in our schools. So thank you for all you do. And we'll just hold that for our next meeting. How's that? All right. Next thing is Hands Across Corvallis. So on January 30th is our annual Hands Across Corvallis breakfast put on by the Corvallis Public Schools Foundation. So if you haven't if you haven't received an invitation, please let me know. We want to make sure that you're able to be there if it works within your schedule. It's the 30th, 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning. And again, the foundation, as you are well aware, does a ton to support what happens in our schools, from educational access to learning enrichment and graduation rates, and many things within those three areas. And it's a great time to come together. I think at this point there's around 300 folks that will be joining us that morning. So it's a great event, and I hope you're able to join us. We are close to putting out a new version of our website. That will happen at the end of January. That was part of the communications audit that was completed last year by Kelly and a consultant who came to get feedback, and we had feedback from staff, family, community about our website and how to make sure that the information there is up to date, easy to access, and provides you the information that you need. So pay attention to that. It will still be on the same URL, so you don't have to make any changes, but just look forward to a new website. Right now, just so you know, we are in the process of doing a survey with staff around the 26-27 calendar, which feels like a long time away, but it's really not. I promise you that. One of the reasons why we're getting that feedback is because of now that we give official recognition of Juneteenth, and we have Labor Day. Those two holidays have really bookended our school year. And traditionally in this community, we've stayed away from starting before Labor Day. But because of where Juneteenth falls, there are times when kids may come back to school for a day or 2 days. And so we're trying to get some feedback from folks where we have to look at that a little bit differently. So just so you know, that's something we're currently doing a survey with staff. Two more things. One is that as a partnership, Corvallis School District was a partner in receiving the Black Student Success Grant, which was a grant from the Oregon Department of Education. Kalia Kidder at Linus Pauling has been involved in that work, along with Jason Dorsett, Kelsey Nava Costales from Albany, and Joanne Miller, who helped to write that grant. And so it is a 4-year grant, and we will have resources to continue to support our Black and African American students and their successes here in CSD, and also supporting family and community. So I'll be sure to share more information about that. Marcianne and I are meeting with some principals next week to talk about the best way to utilize those funds here in Corvallis. And then finally, Osborne, just so you know, an update on Osborne Aquatic Center. We have received more information back from our engineers, and at this point, one of the goals is looking at, is there a way we can open up the outdoor pool as we continue to figure out what are the next steps on the interior. So just have that in mind as sort of one of those next steps as we move to more access to the water and to the pools for our students. So those are my updates, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ryan from the board?
Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan. I do have one question. How are things going with Philomath with the pool share?
The Clemens Pool is busy. They have allowed us to use it for our CHS swim team. As you know, the CHS CV rivalry, we've moved to the Lebanon pool, though, just because it has more space around the pool. Some of the folks who've used our pool for Parks and Rec are using the pool over there at Clemens as well. So we are making a contribution financially so that our team can participate there and practice there. But as a whole, it's been a really important partnership between our two communities. And Susan Holliday, the superintendent there, initially reached out to me and said, hey, I know you're looking for space. There's probably a way we can help to support you. And so, again, it's appreciation to our neighboring communities for stepping up and helping us to make that happen. Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan. That's good to hear. And just want to say thank you to Philomath, too, for letting us practice there with the students. The next item on the agenda is public comment, and I understand there's no comment cards have been submitted, so we're going to not have public comment at this time. The next item on the agenda is new standards, diploma requirements, and upcoming adoptions update. That's Amy, Kim, and Nikki, and you have a slide presentation?
Hello. Yeah, I think we're working. Oh, we're just going to start with introductions because I know we have one new board member that may not know all of us. And so I'm Nikki McFarland. I'm the high school coordinator.
My name's Amy Leeson, elementary coordinator.
And I'm Kim Johnson, the middle school coordinator and Bridges principal.
All right, Kim, you can move to the first slide. So what we came to talk to you about tonight, you'll hear lots about curriculum instruction and implementation of curriculum. And we wanted to start with this slide that gives you a little bit of a picture of what's to come. And the 2 years that are not on there above social sciences are health and science. And I think one of the things that we want you to take away from this is this understanding that every year, as we're talking about curriculum, we're really talking about 3 different things, that the state is doing revisions of standards in one content area. We're working on implementation of. And so it's just multifaceted. And we just want you to have that understanding. Last year, we came to you to talk about science curriculum, and so that's not on there, but that was a 3-year cycle. And then this year, we're like in the district implementation, we'll work on for fall of 25 health, and so we'll talk about those a little bit more. But this is really just kind of a picture of how things are, what's to come.
I'll just go on. Our next slide is just talking about some of the curriculums and adoptions that we're working on. And so currently this year, we're working on our health adoption and looking at what is available there in the different levels. And as Amy was saying, every year we're not just focusing on the curriculum we're adopting, right? We're also focusing on what is the next one that's coming down the road with the standards that are being adjusted, and what is the one that we are in our second year of implementation in, right? So everything is always at a different level, and we're focusing on all of those pieces. As an example, at the end of this month, when middle school has their 2 PD days, one of those days we're going to be spending a good deal of time in those content areas and having the people be able to use time to focus on their level of implementation, whether like ELA is in their second year, science is in their first year, health is still working on an adoption. And yeah, there we go.
Gotta turn it on. There we go. So one of the things that that Ryan and I talked about when we initially planned to do this presentation was the upcoming adoption of, or not adoption, but the implementation of the new integrated social science standards. It's hard to believe that when we adopted new social science materials 7 years ago, I was in my bedroom and we were all at home. And so here it is again. It feels like really recent, and yet it must have been a while ago. So Oregon has had new integrated social science standards, but they are not required for implementation until fall. And so that is the cycle that both Kim and Amy were talking about, is like we get new standards. So the standards are like there for teacher review now. Next year we'll get materials from the state that we can look at, and then the following year we'll be implementing. The social science standards are integrated. So there have been some laws, and I'll go over those in the next slide, but they integrate the Holocaust and genocide standards. They integrate tribal history, shared history standards. They also integrate the new, at high school, civics graduation requirement, and there are SEL components related to things like identity. I'll go to the next slide. I think what's and that's still me. I was like, maybe that's Kim. I know we talked about it. So these pieces of legislation really are impacting the ethnic studies standards. What's different about each of these is that the tribal history, shared history legislation was really about curriculum and the state providing curriculum. And though the curriculum is for multiple subjects. So you can see those in the slides: language arts, health PE, math, science, and social science. And then in 2021, Senate Bill 664 for Holocaust and other genocides, that was really about concepts, that teachers should be teaching these big concepts around the Holocaust and other genocides. And then now in 2026, with House Bills 2845 and 2023, that is the actual standards. And those standards bring in the concepts and not necessarily the curriculum, but the relevant standards into the social science integrated standards. So I just wanted to, that was part of what I wanted to talk about, is like they're different and they're coming together, but they started kind of with different intentions: curriculum, concepts, and then standards. And so we're going to talk about what's happening at each of our levels. So at high school right now, we will be doing our adoption next year. So usually the ODE in October will put out a list of approved materials from the state. So what I'm doing with high school social studies teachers is I have all of the standards for high school, and they have reviewed those standards and said, I teach that in this course, and these are the related lessons. And what that allows us to do is identify the gaps. What are the things that we don't feel like we have great lessons for, or aren't covered in our pathway through the social science courses, because that's going to help us to have a direction and kind of some look-fors in the materials that will come to us from the state next year. And then Amy and Kim are going to talk about what's happening at their levels.
At the middle school level, it's really easy to say because we're doing the same thing that they're doing at the high school. We have the same alignment with the standards. We're looking for those gaps so that when we go to look at the materials during that adoption period, we know what we need to fill those.
And at elementary, similar, but a little bit different just because of the way elementary works. We are also, later this spring, we'll be looking at our lessons for racial equity, what we've been teaching from the tribal history lessons, our SEL curriculum, and our language arts materials to see where there's alignment, where there isn't alignment, and then we'll look for ways and materials and needs after we know where we are with all of this.
Then I'm going to talk about the next slide. So in addition to new standards, legislation has high school being a pretty busy place for change. So we also have a 0.5 civics course requirement for the class of 2026 and a 0.5 higher education and career path skills credit also, for the class of 2027 and a personal financial education credit for the class of 2027. So all of these come out of our legislature. And we are in the process of making plans for each of these. So we currently have government. Government is already in our board policy as a requirement. And so I'm working with the ODE and the teachers on looking at the civic standards and making sure our courses are aligned to those new standards and talking about changing the course name to civics. So that conversation is happening this week. The higher education and career path skills credit is a credit that students will earn through their advisor class at both of our comprehensive high schools. That is all about exploring yourself, identifying what your interests are, your aptitudes, and then looking at different careers and colleges. And then we have the new personal financial education credit. We actually have a teacher from our district, Anna Zachariah, that was on the standards committee. And so she's already teaching, she's been teaching financial algebra. And so it was nice for her to be there and see where her standards showed up in those new standards that she worked on with the committee. And then at CV, we've been offering a personal finance class. And so the teachers in both of those courses are looking at the standards and redesigning their courses around those standards. And at CHS, they'll be adding an additional personal finance class. The nice thing about both of these credits is that they can be taught by a teacher with any credential, and they can fall into a variety of subjects. So at first, when personal financial education came out, folks thought it could only be taught by social studies teachers, but it can be taught by many teachers. It can even be taught in CTE business programs. So I think this is the last slide or second to last slide. Yeah. So this year and beyond, these are all the things that are happening. So we are implementing and adopting and getting ready for what's coming next. So this year we're implementing the new standards in the advisor classes at high school.
We are implementing the new science materials that we had, as well as the new reading materials that we had, and focusing on some science of reading PD.
And we are implementing science in the middle school, and people are super excited about it. The style that we have adopted has already been aligned. I mean, style looked ahead, did their alignment with the Oregon standards as well as the ethnic studies standards, and so those are already in there. So as they're teaching them, they're already built in.
And then as we've shared, we're working on the K-12 health adoption, so that will be coming to you later this spring. And then we postponed the science adoption at the high school, but environmental science is the area that is needed right away because that science is changing more than others. It's also related to our board goals around sustainability. So we will be bringing that adoption to you as well. And then next school year, we'll have a new course at CHS. We'll have new health materials in place, and we'll be working on the social science adoption to prepare for the implementation of the new standards we spoke about in the following school year. I think there's one more slide, and then we'll have questions. I know we've gone over a lot of information. One of the things is, I said 7 years ago, I did an adoption from my bedroom for the social science materials. One of the things that we're implementing district-wide as like a common practice is rounding, where we are asking folks questions about how things are going, like what's going well, what are some challenges, what barriers are there, what can we do as leaders to support this work. So I've been rounding with teachers in language arts, mathematics, world languages. I'm thinking what our most recent adoptions are, and there's one more, and asking them those questions so that every year our adoption process and most importantly our implementation processes go better. And so I wanted to include this slide in the slideshow because I think it shows what we are learning as leaders at the district level about how to continually improve our work, ultimately so that our students are experiencing the type of learning that they should be experiencing in every classroom. So you can read it. I don't feel like I need to read all of those things, but most importantly, I think, is just having that open communication is super important for staff, and knowing like what are the things that are always actions, and then where are the places where they have that teacher freedom and the ability to use their personal interest in craft to make their classrooms really dynamic. Do you have any questions?
I'm sure folk have questions. Who has questions? Oh, yes, go ahead, Ryan.
Amy, can you talk a little bit more about the science of reading? And I don't think you have to give us the broad version of that, but just a little bit more, because it's something that we hear a lot about, and I know that there's been work that's been happening and professional development that's gone into it. So just like I guess an elevator pitch on that.
Sure. So I came to you last spring, when was that, to get approval for a big chunk of money that we got, and it was pretty fantastic. And so we took that, and what we have done is what I had laid out for you. We purchased a new writing program that was more up to date and in alignment with science of reading. We purchased new reading materials at Lincoln and Garfield for our dual immersion schools. And then we also spent some money on coaching, and we have a few newer positions that are really helping teachers with the implementation of the curriculum, and the focus. The materials are updated and have a pretty intentional way that you are to teach reading at K2. And that has not always been what we've been up to in our classrooms. And so really being side by side with teachers. Just yesterday, all day, all the second grade teachers at one of the schools were planning all morning and practicing, and then the afternoon the kindergarten teachers were. So with that grant, we have funds set aside that we're doing professional development around that. In addition to that, we also opened up a course that is just about science of reading, and I offered it to every K2 teacher and every principal and all the coaches and people that were relevant. And it's a pretty intensive course. It's like 56 hours of work. And so we paid for it, and then they get a stipend upon completion of it. And then because in our district we have Shauna Sanow, who's works at the state level in this, in the area of science of reading, and is pretty passionate about it. She is facilitating the cohorts of teachers that are going through that. So we come together with those teachers pretty regularly, at least 3 or 4 times as they're going through that work. And I don't know, I'm sure there's more I'll think of, but I know that, like, at least that's a gist of it. We've had 45 teachers take that in the summer, and right now 38 teachers are participating. So that is the biggest PD that I've ever had teachers say yes to in the district and actually want to come. So, yeah, so it's super exciting.
70-ish teachers doing over 50 hours of PD around the science of reading is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, when Shauna's and I came up with the plan, I was like, let's just do a pilot in the summer so we can see how it goes, because Eastern Oregon is partnering with us on this. And we're like, yeah, maybe we'll get like 5 teachers. And I kept texting her, I'm up to 20. Now it's 35. Now it's 45. It's not much of a pilot, but it's been great.
And then in the future, we will have our 21st Century Grant pages. We'll have a presentation about what's happening in our after-school program and around reading as well.
Perfect.
Okay. Thanks. Questions? Okay, go ahead, Chris, and then Sammy. Then I'll come back on this.
All that you just presented is exactly why we need your positions at the district office, because that is so much work, and it's obvious that there's a lot more to it than you can even describe tonight. So I appreciate that. And then also, I heard, and I'm sure my other board members heard during the elementary night, over and over again, the support that they were getting from Lee, from district office, that was really, really helpful to their reading programs and their schools. So I think that's also great. Yeah.
Also, comments, but feel free to comment on my comment. Here's the takeaways I have 3 takeaways that I can share with the community. And looking at the slides, hearing what we heard today, our teachers are all in to make sure our students have better and more robust reading skills than we have done before. And when they get to read, they can do arithmetic and connect with the world, and they get to graduate. And that gets me to the second takeaway. That slide you added with more graduation requirements just gives me simple arithmetic, which is our students today need to do more to prove that they can graduate and be functioning in the world. So we are not dropping the bar, we're raising the bar.
Can I add to that one comment? Because I
Please.
think we are raising it and we're giving them what they're asking for. Like, students are saying, I graduate not ready for my next steps, right? Financially, like, how do I open a bank account? What does it mean to take out a loan? Like, if I go to college, how much money am I actually going to pay for that if I take out loans for that? The stuff that has been added, I think, is valuable, and it is more.
Absolutely, and it's way more valuable than how fast you can fill a bubble after bubble on a test. I haven't done that for a very long time, and I'm okay. But the things that you just mentioned, I had to learn them as an adult, and really appreciate that attention, not only from the state, but also from you here, making sure we do it right. And doing it right is the third item, which I heard across the state. People say when you add more requirements and curricular standards, we have the dilemma of limited resource, which is time. And you just showed us how you're doing this in a very mindful way. You're not adding layers of courses over what we have. You're mindfully looking into what are we teaching now? Is it matching those standards? And how can we weave the new learnings that we need to and add into what we're already doing, so we're not duplicating the work for our students. And that's actually really brilliant way that you're proactive. And to your last point there, when we have the time to do the work mindfully, when we collaborate, we can do it more effectively. And I think that's the third one that's really a great aha moment for me, which is when we have to add more requirements for what students need to learn, really critical stuff about their cultural and emotional competency and awareness and development. All of these things are important for their success. And when you have limited time in this classroom and in the school, the only way to do it effectively is to look at our current curriculum and integrate what we are doing into it and add what we need to add and show to the state that we're already doing what we're already doing. So these are the 3 takeaways. Feel free to comment if you agree or if there's anything you want to add to it. Thank you.
Anybody on the side yet, or? Okay, Shauna, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the tremendous amount of work that you put into this. And as Sammy was mentioning in streamlining, there's so much that goes into, as you said, review, adoption, implementation, and having this rolling cycle where this is continually happening on multiple fronts at all times is a tremendous amount of work to be managing, juggling, and to be taking on a lot of that work even before it comes to teachers in classrooms who then are taking on a tremendous amount of work themselves and then really thoughtfully implementing, integrating into what they do, bringing in what's new and helpful and expands what they are able to do, as well as makes shifts and changes. And I can't help thinking about just the tremendous load this is, not only on you, but then on the teachers as well. And so just want to express my gratitude for them, for this continued work to make sure that the education that they are bringing to students is current, is up to date, is really meaningful in so many ways. And I'm getting to a question also in all of that. So one of the things I was thinking about as I was just reflecting on this is that, especially for subject-specific educators, it sounds like they get a little bit of a chance to breathe in between some of these rolling adoptions, where maybe something comes in language arts-wise at the high school level, doing a lot of that work up front in that first year of implementation, and then actually having a chance to try it out before the next wave comes. When I think about, and I don't want to negate how much work that is. That's a tremendous amount of work. Thinking down to, say, elementary school teachers, K through 5 who every single year are integrating a brand new piece into what they're already doing in this very integrated way. Seems like there isn't a chance to just pause and breathe and to really lean into a curriculum, see how it's working, and make adjustments before the next adjustments are being made. What needs are you seeing there in terms of, or how are teachers being supported in that? What other needs are coming out? Are there other ways that support can be offered there?
It is super tricky, like you said, and I think what I have noticed in working with the teachers, so let's say this last round where reading isn't on here, and yet we had to do reading because that was the state law. So I think part of what's in here, it's in small notes somewhere, this can be changed at any time, right? Like, and it did. And so I think the more voice that I have with teachers, the more I'm in classrooms, the more principals are in classrooms, the more guided conversations we have, and the deeper understanding of the why is super helpful for us to move into something. We're also we haven't made, sometimes we're just readopting the newer edition of what we already have. And so it doesn't feel as drastically different as it could. I think the other thing we've worked on in the last little bit of time is the similarities between our curriculum. So it feels, it doesn't feel like such a hard shift when you go from language arts to math, because it's the same tone, it's the same kind of structure you have in your classroom, which also helps. And it is tricky. I mean, I think that there's just owning that, and that we're going to do the best we can, which means that sometimes we have to continually change. And I think prep time for teachers is really important, and it's a critical part of the work that we need to make sure that they have that time. So those are just some thoughts.
We're just about out of time for this item, but we're also ahead, and so can we add like 10 minutes just in case there's more questions? And if we get done before the 10 minutes, that's okay too. Didn't want to have to do that again if we don't need to. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I had some too, so that's why I added more time. But I wasn't meant to make sure other people did too. I just wanted to clarify on the with environmental science, with that, it's not just sustainability, it's also literacy. So I just want to make sure, like, for community members, that's not getting missed too, because that was a big change, that in a big part too, which I would think would be under environmental science. But
yeah, it is. And what I haven't shared yet with the board, I came last year and said we were going to postpone the science adoption. When the teachers reviewed the new materials, they said, these look the same as what we already have, except in the area of environmental science. So, that's why we will be spending some funding to purchase new materials for environmental science. The other thing I do want to share, since we're here, it's related to your question, I think, is that we, on Earth Day, I think that's what we decided, we're going to be surveying our students about sustainability and eco-literacy, and because we don't have any baseline data from our students. So we were talking about that goal and how do we measure how we're doing, and then we thought, well, we don't have any data. So I worked with principals on developing a survey, and then took it to students to get feedback, and then back to leadership. And now we have it kind of ready to go, and we thought that would be a good time. We are serving our kids and staff about a lot of things, right? Ryan mentioned the calendar. We're also asking students about school lunches right now. So they like to do focus surveys, they told us, and they want them spread out.
Okay, that sounds great. That'd be interesting to see what we know too with the survey, a separate one, maybe, as the board, because not everybody knows the difference too between the sustainability and eco-literacy. And so the other one was, is there support from the state? Is there very much support from the state on there's a lot of changes that you just talked about, and I'm kind of wondering where that's at, because or is it the usual, there's not very much support? And
I mean, at least at high school, there's changes. There's not funding that comes along with those changes, and there's investments required by every district, right? Every time we purchase materials, there are those investments. the support from the state is like providing, really the guidance. And most of that's very technical about like, this is the name of the course and this is the course code and this is the requirement and here's where you have leeway. But it doesn't go much beyond that.
Okay, that was my next question, was around training, like how you mentioned a little bit of training, but what does training look like? Because it's a lot of changes in the shifts, especially with the standards for social studies shifted so much, right? And all of the three of those different bills all got wrapped into, they changed it, like it feels like, I don't know how many times, to change just the standards to just collapse everything in instead of even though, as you pointed out, the tribal history, shared histories is in different areas. It probably could be argued that some of those other places could be outside of social science, but I know that they're packaged within that.
So is your question, does the state help to provide training, or what is the training that we're providing?
Does the training feel adequate at this point, or is there like a need for additional trainings? Like, and I know that I know just from my involvement with the American Indian Alaska Native Committee that they have, like right now they're having monthly or twice a month. It's either once or twice a month for the tribal history, shared histories, but I don't know if there's anything like that on the other standards.
I haven't seen anything besides that PD that's available for tribal history, shared history. I haven't
Okay.
seen it elsewhere.
And that's the one that has, like you said, because that one was curriculum focused too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. I was just curious about that. And then with the science of reading, because we get asked a lot about, well, it's obviously a big area that a lot of districts need improvement on with reading. Do you have, I know you don't have a magic future scene device of some kind. I don't even think AI could predict it, but what is your expected, like, kind of when we might could potentially see some shifts in elementary level reading?
I would say you've probably already, and as we last year and into this year, rolling it out and pushing pretty hard and changing some assessment systems and monitoring data even more closely, we're already seeing some growth more higher than expected. So we'll have some of that. And you probably saw some of that with the elementary when they shared a little bit of that. I think what's on the horizon that's coming next is this grant was really K2, 3. You could use not really 4th or 5th. You had to minimum use like 10% or less. I am anticipating seeing money coming for 4th through 8th or 4th through 12th as like as we continue to push this. And I would say the other thing that I'm seeing on the horizon is the potential for to get your license to teach, you would have to have taken a science of reading course. So those are two things that I'm seeing.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Alrighty. Any last call for questions on this one? Okay, thanks you all for all your work you're doing. And next on the agenda is the Lynn Benton Lincoln Education Service District, also known as the LBL ESD, to affirm the 25-27 local service plan. And this has you for that, Ryan?
Yeah, I was just going to give a little bit of information. Some of you are newer board members, and just a little bit about the concept of the ESD and how that plays out. So each district across our state is supported by an ESD. And an ESD is primarily there to provide resources and support that smaller districts couldn't acquire on their own. So some really good examples of that are things like physical therapy and occupational therapy, augmentative communication, some services that if you were a district, Alcee as a great example, because they are in our 12 districts in our ESD, couldn't necessarily hire a full FTE or a position to serve and support their students. And so it's a collective where all 12 districts come together in Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties and access services through our ESD. The local service plan is a 2-year plan, and it is designed in our ESD. The way that it's set up is that there is tier 1 services, and then there are also tier 2 services. Tier 1 services are services that we've all collectively agreed that all districts will have access to. And so for a service to be a tier 1 service, it takes 2/3 vote of the 12 superintendents, and those superintendents need to represent at least 50% of the students in our region in order for something in a tier 1 service. Once all of the tier 1 services are provided and paid for, everything left is considered tier 2. And tier 2 is based on the number of students you have in your district, based on the dollars that are left. And that allows individual districts to spend those resources on things that the either the ESD can provide more of them. So as an example, we use some of our tier 2 services for school psychologist time, because what we receive in tier 1 is not enough to complete the evaluations for our students. So we pay for additional tier 2 dollars to pay for school psychologists. There are other services that we also pay for through tier 2 that are services that the ESD cannot provide. And so in those cases, we can use those dollars and use them in different ways. So an example of that is that we have health navigators that we are paying towards, and Benton County are paying towards. So it's a 50-50 match. But we're using tier 2 dollars. The ESD doesn't have that service. So we're able to use those funds rather than our general funds that our district gets from the state. These are dollars we take from the ESD and we use them for those sorts of services. So that's the way that the structure of the ESD is set up. Historically, I have been on the side of a smaller district, having for quite a while, and now in Corvallis as the second largest in the 12 districts. And what I have tended to do as I've made votes has been around services to our smaller school districts, because I feel a responsibility to make sure that the smaller districts who couldn't get those services on their own have the services they need. So just as you kind of know about me and my philosophy in these ESD meetings and making these decisions in terms of the local service plan, that has been the way that I have really supported over my tenure here in Corvallis. So the service plan is in front of you. It's a 2-year plan. We're asking for you to make a motion to approve it. It has been something that we've reviewed at our ESD superintendent meetings over the last 3 months. So I feel like people have had a chance to give input. Some of the things that used to be in tier 1 are not in tier 1 any longer because we're not utilizing them. And it wasn't a good use of our funds. So we've made some adjustments. And as a whole, I feel like it's a pretty strong plan to bring forward to you. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thanks, Ryan. Questions? Questions, comments? Go ahead, Bernie, then Sammy.
Just for clarification,
Yeah.
The smaller school districts, their student population is weighted heavier in terms of resources, or is that what I'm understanding, or I'm misunderstanding?
So on the tier 1, it's about scalability. So they get a lower rate typically because we're all going in for all the students across our region. So they have some cost savings there. But then when we get to tier 2, it's really based on number of students. And so we have equal funds based on the size of our school districts. Yeah. So it's a combo. Yeah.
Ryan, could you highlight for the early childhood special education evaluation? It's really important and critical, and I appreciate that is here as tier 1 service. I believe continues to be tier 1 service. Is it enough, or do we need more to cover the evaluation needs?
So when I get to the legislative concepts that COSA is bringing forward, one of them is around funding for early childhood special education, because that's an area that has not historically kept up with the costs associated with it, and ESDs are responsible for providing those services across our state. Yeah, so it has not kept up.
Thank you.
Other folk? I was going to say something similar, but I'll save it because when I was going around visiting the different boards in our region
Yeah.
during to speak on like part of why I was running for our regional representative, the special education one came up a lot, and hearing how high the numbers are in some of the districts that 1921
Yeah.
in our region. And so I'll say the rest of the comments around that. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you're saying on that. But that was one of my comments, was just that I appreciate that you're thinking about those districts too, that definitely wouldn't have support, even though we still need support too. It makes it tough but this is a shared resource. And so I would hope that the community understands like the importance of when we do have that shared resource, that we're making sure that more students are served across the whole region too.
Yeah, and you know, many states have similar models. California, it's the county school districts that provide a similar service to what our ESDs do. So there's different ways that different states go about it, but generally it's that regional collaboration and utilization of resources to really have an impact on the whole area. And again, we have 12 school districts in our ESD. It's Lynn, all school districts in Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln counties.
Mm-hmm. Do you have another comment, Sammy?
Just want to do a spiel here for the budget committee of the Lynn Benton Lincoln. We need to have 2 members from Corvallis. Right now we have 1 vacant and have to be a board member. So if anybody's interested in being on the budget committee for the ESD, bring your name forward. And if there's 2, I'm happy to step down from that position as well. But it's a really important role to really advocate for this work. And I believe their meetings are similar to our meetings in May, and it's like 20 minutes, pretty easy.
I think they meet once.
They meet only once, yes.
And to clarify, you said it needs to be a board member, right?
I believe so, right, Ryan?
I don't know that that's the case because Sarah is able to continue to fulfill her term and has decided to do so.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so that's good for the community to know then.
Yes.
Yes, there's other community members. Okay.
Yes, if anybody's interested, I'm happy to. Sorry.
You don't have to, yeah.
I don't have
Okay.
to.
Yeah, you do not have to be. So if there's anybody in the community, Sammy is saying that he will step down for somebody to serve.
Yes. Yes.
And that's great experience for somebody, and the ESD does some really important work. So with that being said, does anyone wish to make a motion?
Chair.
Go ahead.
I move to approve the Lynn Benton Lincoln ESD 2025-2027 local service plan.
Second?
I'll second.
It's been moved by Sammy and seconded by Shauna to approve the Lynn Benton Lincoln Education Service District 2025 to 20 local service plan. Is there any further discussion? Okay. It has been moved by Sammy and seconded by Shauna to approve the Lynn Benton Lincoln Education Service District 2025 to 2027 local service plan. Bernie?
Aye.
Sammy?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Shauna?
Aye.
Therese?
Aye.
Judah?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion passes unanimously. And then the next item on the agenda is the OSBA and COSA-related legislative conversation and debrief. And this is Ryan and Sammy. You all have slides? Okay. They said whoever's slide is up first is who's going first, so, yeah. You get to decide over there, Kim.
I have 1 slide, so. I know, and you're got more slides.
Okay, here you go. I put yours up first, I'm sorry.
All right, so as you recall, we had a regional roadshow, and Vince Adams facilitated a conversation around advocacy. What I want to share with you around Oregon School Board Association's legislative priorities that we are ramping up to be ready in advocating for several priorities, and none of them will be possible if we don't work with the grassroots efforts and with compelling stories. So I'm going to pause here and say, if you have not filled the member advocacy survey, and community members, audience, you're welcome to check this survey as well. Please feel free to raise your phone and scan the code, and happy to send you the link afterwards as well, where you can identify which priorities you care about the most, and then OSBA will be ready to share with you how those priorities are advancing in the legislative session, ask you to share your perspective, a local story around that. So that's a really important approach that OSBA is embracing and focusing on all members' approach to advance our priorities. So that's really important perspective, because they can hear from the lobbyists all the time, but the intentionality that you get from a member who served the constituency saying, here is how Corvallis is impacted by the 11% cap on special education, it's a different story. When we share the successes of how we're investing in special education and say, here's what we're going to miss if we continue doing what we do with the funding that's going to be limited, that's a story that will be compelling. So that's the first step I want to share, and maybe we can leave the slide for a little bit and take it down. But what I want to move into is, what are those priorities? Now, if you ask any two different individuals in the education community what are the priorities, you will hear a lot. But the common theme among most, if not all, is going to be funding is the root cause of many of the challenges we have. Now, we have a great progress this time around, where the governor acknowledged that we're way behind in how we estimate what's the starting point. So every time we started at the legislative session, January, beginning of the long session, 5 feet behind the starting line. And we have to advocate by starting to say, this is actually a reduction budget instead of continuing the service level budget. And then when we reach to May or June and have an understanding, okay, here's how close we can get to keep the lights open and not have any additional investments, now it's almost in the overtime where we were very limited to advocate for strategic investments. So that's the good news. The challenging part of the news is the assumptions of the current service level are $515 million increase to keep up doing what we do. And also there's another number, $600 million, is to keep up with the PERS rates. Now, the PERS rates are commitments that we have made as a state and school districts for our employees. It is going to be a one-time, not necessarily one-time, but temporarily event. Unfortunately, that temporary event is over the course of a generation, which means this $600 million, if we defer to the next biennium, that means our students for this generation are going to have reduction in the services they need. Now, PERS might be resolved in 10 or 20 or 15 years, but we can't push that and say that's something we can absorb. If we absorb it, that means we're going to have a reduction in the service. So when you see $515 million and $600 million, you got to add them together and have a number. And that's where the state, the governor, and also the education community and the legislative leadership is working together to understand what is that number that we need to make sure every child in every district get the help that they need. And that number, as soon as we hear about it, we need to really advocate for it strongly, not only by saying we need that number to pass, please vote for that number. That's not enough. We need to really lean in on the experts from our superintendents and what you'll hear from Ryan around what COSA really lean in, and OWASBO, the business officials, who will tell us this is the actual cost of running the business. And that's the number that we're getting. So you're going to hear multiple numbers from different stakeholders. OSBA really advocates for getting the right assessment from the experts who know what it costs actually to conduct business. And that gets me to, what does that mean? Special education, as Chair White Bear shared, it varies from one district to another. Some districts have 11%, some have 9%, many have more than 14, 15, or even 20% of the student population from special education needs. And they deserve and they need an investment into the resources that help them to learn to their needs. And unfortunately, we are capped at 11%. You don't get more than that. So raising the cap where school districts can get investments that are appropriate to the number of students who are on special education plans is going to be really a priority. And we need to make sure that the investments are there for that cap when it increases. Also, we have the high disability investments account for students who have high costs, needs that are high costs. We need to maintain those investments for those students. Another priority you are going to hear is making sure that we have good assessments on the facilities. So we have the matching grants for our bonds, and when you pass a bond, you get matching grants from the state, making sure that our facilities are safe and our students are safe. Summer learning, just as a reminder, we invested in our summer learning fully thanks for our foundation and the investments from our local community. We need to make sure those investments are available for every district, including ours, from the state. The state is invested partially in summer learning, and we need to share that value. Early literacy, as we saw, that there's a huge impact on it. Now, what does that all of that mean? You may want to pick 1 or 2 or 3 of these priorities and understand how it is impacting our district. Have the compelling story about how you think this will impact us. Share the win, share the success that we have done, and then share the impact if we don't reach that investment that we need. So that's where we are right now. What this will get you if you sign up in this survey is an update as soon as we're ready to go to Salem and contact our representatives and senators and leadership in the education committees. Then you're ready to know what's going on and what's the hearing that's upcoming. And also sometimes there will be specifics that we want to share. For example, there's a bill about mandatory training that you shall do all of those trainings in 90 days after your election. We all know we're volunteering, and 90 days after assuming the office, 90 days after assuming the office is during the summer. So you might be tapped into specific perspectives based on what you check there, and your voice is going to be important. We need to be all in, and our community members are invited to share with us. So this is a high level of the priorities. It's going to be investments in funding, including special education needs, and making sure that quality education is met by making sure we're meeting the current service level. The second one that you heard a lot about is accountability, and our executive director, Emily Neshik, is meeting with the governor tomorrow to talk about what accountability means and how can we hold districts accountable. That's what the governor is asking. And also we're asking how can we hold the legislature and the governor accountable in investing what we need to invest in. So we can't provide outcomes without investing in those needs. So that's really going to be an important conversation, what accountability means and how can we hold ourselves all accountable into investing into education. So I believe that's the high level, and if there's any overlap, that means that's great. If there's some unique things that Ryan mentions that does not mean that OSBA is not interested in it or elevating it, that's what we're hearing from the members, and definitely OSBA and COSA works hand in hand. Our members and our staff work hand in hand in the legislature to make sure we're advocating for the kids. So back to you, Ryan.
So I think. So what I would like to do is I have a few slides to share, but while we go through them, if there's questions you have about any of these concepts, please ask, because really what my goal is that you have a good sense of what we're up to, and that you're also able to speak to some of these priorities. And so go ahead and go to the next one, Kim. So as part of the Coalition of Oregon School Administrators, we have been meeting since May plan for this session and identify what are those areas that we need to make sure we are paying attention to and advocating for. And as Sammy shared, we are starting in a much better place than we have in the past. In the past, we started, because of the way that the roll up from one biennium to the next was accounted for, we were always behind. Here, I think the easiest example to think about is that when we spend money in a biennium, the first year we spend 49% of the money. The second year we spend 51% of the money. But when they thought about what we needed for the next biennium, they started at 50%. So we were already 1 percentage point behind, which doesn't seem like a lot if you think about 1 percentage point, but when you're thinking of $11 billion, that's a significant difference. And so there's things like that that were built into the formula. And so I think actually after the strike in PPS, there's more attention to what does that roll up really mean and how do we account for that. And so we're starting in a much better place than we have historically, because the governor heard that and has already made adjustments that are really important adjustments. One of the other things about that, though, and as I share this information tonight, to keep in mind is local context. So for us, local context means fewer students in our system, fewer students coming in versus students graduating. And so all of these things are Oregon-wide, but there's specific differences that will happen or impacts that we'll have because of the number of students we have coming in. Remember, when I started here, we had about 6,700 students. Now we have closer to 5,800 students, and over each of the next 4 years, we'll have over 500 students graduate and about 300 students come in. So we'll have 800 students less, even beyond that. So when we are funded per student, and sometimes based on an additional weight for disability or other factors, those things make a difference. And at the same time, we're being funded at a lower rate because we have fewer students coming into the system. So while that's great news, that is not that is still a cuts budget for us, no doubt about it. But again, that's because we have fewer kids who are living in our community. So a great place to start. We're appreciative of what the governor came up with, and at the same time, that's a matter of accuracy. And now we have to have the conversation about adequacy. And those two conversations both need to happen: appreciation and recognition that there's still work to be done around adequacy. Those major grants that we have, SSA, Student Success Act, Student Investment Account, Measure 90H, which is high school success, the continuation of those is really important as we think about what happens in the session. What you'll see later is that there's also questions for us and advocacy for us around unfunded mandates or the paperwork requirements. So as you also know, we've kind of kept track of how many reports we're sending into the states and the state and the Fed. We have continued to keep track of that. We're doing about 320 reports annually to the Department of Ed and the Feds. There's 365 days in the year. There's less than 320 days in a school year, and that's the number of reports we're responsible for. So when we think about and talk about accountability, there's a lot of accountability that's happening through those reports that we're submitting. And when we have conversations about the staff we need to have at a district office to submit those reports to continue to receive the funds, there's important work that has to happen. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question about that number for current service level. Was that before the rural school funding cut happened, or was
Yeah.
it after?
No, because that's a federal, the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
so this was, so the 11.36 came after we knew what the actual PERS rates were and after they accounted for the roll-up in
Yeah.
CSL. It does not account for rural schools.
Okay, but would that change because they no longer have that funding, or is that just only state dollar? That's where I'm getting a little bit confused. So
Yeah.
if this is like, because it's gonna cost more for those schools to operate without that federal funding,
Yeah.
does that
No, that's
does
not
that affect that number though? Like,
N-
does that mean that's not enough anymore, or?
it does mean that there's less
Okay.
money. Another great example, and I'll try not to go too far in the weeds, but Title I is is our funds that we have, and we get those funds based on the number of students who are navigating poverty in our school district. We anticipate having 25% less funds in Title I, and this is before we have a new president. and a new house. And so where there's concerns about those funds, there's concerns about Medicaid funds that we use for our mental health therapists. There's concerns about Title II funds that we use for professional development. All of those federal funds are not included in the state fund. That's based on property taxes and the state funds in Oregon.
Right. I get that part, and
And that's more, and
it
I hear
means
what
that,
you're saying.
yeah, so there's more expenses that are gonna need to get paid for to even keep those services that were funded federally. I know we're not a rural school, but I know that one
Mhm.
passed already.
Yeah,
That's why I use that, and so it is gonna impact like where those dollars get spread probably. Okay, that, I won't
absolutely.
keep on and on about it, but I just wanted to make sure people knew that when there's changes to federal dollars, that means that there's more strain on those dollars
exactly.
that were expected to keep current service levels that probably won't be able to anymore, right? So
Right.
it's already, okay.
Yep. So this is the one that Sammy spent a little bit of time talking about, and that's that special education cap. And the way that that works is that as school districts submit in December their census, which is the number of students who qualify for special education services, back in the days of Measure 5, the average number of students who qualified for special education was 11%. That number, though, that percentage has gone up for many school districts. Our school district is closer to 14% right now. There are some school districts that are closer to 18 or 19%, but that number has never changed from that 11% in terms of the double weight, meaning they get are counted as a second student in the funding that we get. And so one of the things we'll be talking about in this session is that we think that cap should move to 15% because that's now the average across the state. I think that there has to be a limit on it. I don't think it's a good policy decision to say there's no cap, but I think the average, it makes sense to me. And so that's one of the things we're advocating for. The difference between 11% and 15% statewide is about 400 million kept up. And so there is also advocacy there to try to increase the financial support for those students who qualify in those ways. And early intervention, early childhood is any student between the ages of birth and 5, so before they come to the school district.
Can we stay on this special ed for a second?
Yep.
Because I mentioned earlier, there are districts within our region that are at 21 and
Mhm.
19. And I also know that the ESD is not able to even get all the students probably diagnosed that need services.
Mhm.
If they had better funding, those numbers could potentially go up across all the districts that
Mhm.
are served
Mhm.
in our area. And I do have a little bit of, have questions. I know it's based on the state average, but do you know what our regional average is by chance? Like that's through the
That's a
ESD?
great question. I don't know the answer
That
to
was one of the ones I was like, I wanted to ask the ESD
Yeah.
and stuff. It was,
I'm sure they know, but I'm not sure.
because it'd be interesting to know if it's higher or
Yeah.
lower or the same as the state average, because
Mhm.
I think that matters. And yeah, so that was that one. But
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure. My guess is it's above 15, but that's just a total guess. Funding for unfunded mandates. Again, I talked about some of the requirements that we have that were unexpected that come up throughout a session in terms of legislation and bills. And so we also want to be able to make sure that we're addressing those things that come up during the session. So again, recognizing that there will be changes, and if those changes were to take place, that we would need to be funded in order to do those things. Facilities, Sammy talked about that. We've been really fortunate in our school district to be able to pass a bond and build new schools and have really amazing spaces for students. And in the last round, back in November, there was a school district that if they didn't pass a bond to take care of their buildings, they were going to basically close, and those students were going to go to the neighboring school districts because they couldn't keep their building up to standards and have it be safe. So this is probably more than one legislative session this will take, these concepts, but for us to think about how do we make sure that communities that don't pass bonds, their schools are still up to a level where students can be safe within them. and also finding that balance between districts that are passing bonds and those that aren't. So it's a tricky conversation and a topic, but it's something that we need to be aware of and paying attention to. Right now, there is a survey going on statewide to look at the facilities that our school districts across the state and what the facility needs are, to come up with what that number would be and what that would look like. We don't have that yet, but we feel like that's the first step moving forward to be able to have that conversation. Early literacy, Amy already talked to that one, but there is advocacy to extend or allow those funds to go beyond K-3 to help students continue to build the skill of reading, and also to continue to make sure that we're fully funding these initiatives. Summer learning, you've heard me talk about this one more than once, probably more than twice. I feel like it's an important thing that all students have access to. We're so fortunate that we have a foundation that supports our summer programming, but us kids across the state should have summer programming. The amount of dollars for this last summer were not enough, and also we need to know year over year so that it's not a last minute thing that comes our direction and we're trying to organize and put it together over the last few weeks of school. It just needs to be something that's continually funded year over year. And mental health, again, thinking about some of the work we've been able to do here. Again, it's an area that we're really fortunate to have our therapists that we've been able to hire and hold on to, but across the state, and especially in rural parts of Oregon, those services are just not available. And so there needs to be continued work there. And then attendance, to continue to look at what works, what's making a difference related to attendance, and systems of support for that, and then also transportation and access. So that's another area that I think is an alignment between OSBA and COSA. And then always thinking about workforce and making sure that we're the folks that serve our kids reflect the students in front of them, both in culture, race, and language. And so there's always continued work to be done there. So those are the priorities that we have moving into the session. We know that there'll be lots of bills that come forward beyond these areas that we will either be supportive of or try to provide additional perspective around. And so I expect to be busily involved in that for the next few months moving forward. And again, this last thing I'll say is just to keep in mind that because this is the end of the biennium, we will probably adopt a budget before we have a firm, hard number approved by the state. And that is normal and typical of where we are between this biennium and the next.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Sammy. Questions from anyone? Okay. I did have just for clarification, Sammy, the survey, because I went to double check it, but I couldn't look at it because I already filled it out previously. But anybody in the community can fill that out?
I would go on a limb and say yes, absolutely. I'll ask for forgiveness later on. So definitely, I think OSBA is stronger when not only board members, but also the community that the board members serve are informed of what's going on in Salem. Mm-hmm. And I believe that will be even more powerful for our community to have their voice heard and to know what we're prioritizing.
Okay. The reason I was asking, because I was going to encourage folks, because we had previous sessions when we had our joint conversation with the foundation and we had the advocacy training. So if folk needed to look back at that recording, you can look on the board agendas and look for the agenda that had the foundation on it. I think it was in September, wasn't it? October. Okay, so it was in October. And you can view that training if you want, if you are interested, because this is just follow up to the commitments from the spring when we were talking to the community during the budget season about how to advocate more. And so I wanted to make sure that the community continues to hear these messages of how to engage beyond just here at the board at the state level. And so if you all fill out that survey, that will help you know when you can provide testimony, because I think that was something that the community was asking about, as well as how do we even do that. And so hopefully it's helpful for the board to be giving this information out with you all too, and the community. So, and one thing, when you're hearing the numbers that are coming through the long session, just for community to be aware, and even for the board, is I know last year it was like, oh, that's a huge, it's the highest number invested, like dollar wise, but it was like less investment percent wise of the state budget that went into public education. So it looks like a high number, but the percent of the budget was less. And again, it's gone down 8% over the last few bienniums. And so I think that's really important for community that wants to be involved, and even our own board, to remember to always check to see, like, the dollar might sound like it's a huge investment, but out of this allocation of the entire budget, it's not as much as what it looks like. Anyways, okay.
When it's $1 more, it's a historic investment.
Yes, even if it's percents less. And so just wanted to make sure that folk look beyond headlines that say like things like that when it comes to funding for our public education, because it's really important.
Chair.
Yes.
So I'm really glad that our graduation requirements now include financial literacy, and I'm
Yes.
assuming
Me too.
it's going to include inflation. Sorry for all my friends who might. Anyway, so what I want to say is, in that vein, to the point that the unfunded mandates for any possible legislation, we will hear lots of good ideas that are being proposed. Sometimes you have legislators who propose 40 legislation pieces. So in education, you may track anywhere between 500 to double that in terms of legislative ideas. And here's the tricky part. The legislature is required to disclose the financial or fiscal impact of the legislation on the state. So they may have a law that requires the Department of Education to invest 1 FTE. They have to capture that FTE. But for the 500,000 students, all school districts, if they need to invest 2 FTEs per school district, hypothetically, they don't have to disclose that. So here's the in the disclaimer about fiscal impact. So here's the important part, which is if we're looking at the current service level, any additional legislation that you hear from OSBA or COSA or WASBO saying there is a fiscal impact on us. Now, this is a good idea, but the question that we will be facing in May, just like how in Salem they're going to face in every budget, if we want to have money into that idea, where are we taking the money from? And how are we going to be able to address the needs of the students? So definitely we need to be very mindful that any legislative ideas that come without investments into implementing them, not only on the state level, but also on the local level, needs extra consideration from us. And we need to support our students by elevating that and highlighting that.
Thank you, Sammy. So I have a question for the board. We've been going for an hour and a half. Do you all need a short break, or do you want to keep short break? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you. Okay, we're back to the meeting, and the next item on the agenda is consolidated action. As a reminder, the items under this portion of the agenda are for action. Does anyone have a question about anything in consolidated action? Shauna?
I have a question that I wanted to bring up around the budget parameters.
Okay, budget parameters. Anybody else?
I would like to pull JGAB, please, for discussion.
Okay. JGAB, use of restraint and seclusion. Anything else under consolidated action?
I also have a question on the budget parameters.
Okay.
I also have a question on JGAB.
Okay. So those are the two that's under action. And yeah, so let's start with budget parameters since that one got asked for first.
Okay, so under budget parameters, something that I was hoping to see some mention of, so I'll bring it up as a question, and I also brought some suggested language in case helpful, if it's appropriate at this point in time, was around how do we engage educators and staff who are directly teaching in or involved in coordinating specific programs or specific content areas in helping shape some of the priorities that are decided, both short-term and long-term, or long-term, just thinking about the long-term priority planning. Ryan, I know you said you might have a note on that, but I'm happy to give some.
So based on what we heard last time, we did make a modification, and it may not be what you had envisioned. So I'm glad you brought it up. So under Be Transparent, the fourth bullet at the bottom, it had said, be clear on what actions are being funded to help the district reach its student achievement goals, not just line items and broad expenditure categories. And so what Lauren and I talked about in the modification that we made was to say, be clear on what actions are being funded to help the district reach its board goals. And the thinking behind that was that the board goals do include those specialist positions, so music, art, and so it felt like it embedded it there rather than a separate bullet that just was sort of a standalone. So that's what we thought about, and that's why we brought that forward. And at the same time, that's why this is part of a discussion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can I share the language that I had to propose for this?
Yeah.
And then maybe I would love input from you or others on the board too as to would this already capture that in terms of just referring to the board goals, or would something like this be helpful? So it may be a little bit long, but we can wordsmith or decide. So
Before
Yeah.
you do that, is there anything you wanted to add to our discussion? Okay.
So my suggestion was to say something like, my mic went out. Here we go. Try again. Okay. And this could go, I could see this going in a couple of different places, potentially either under decisions should be informed by data, thinking that this is a form of qualitative data, or under, and it might make sense under taking a long-term perspective to really highlight that this is not short-term decision-making, but really long-term strategic planning. So my thoughts were something like, to the degree possible, funding priorities should also be informed with input and guidance from staff directly involved in teaching and/or coordinating specific content areas and programs, which might include sciences, math, language arts, social studies, music, the arts, programs like Bridges, CTE, libraries, related to ensuring excellent, equitable, relevant, and engaging student learning experiences.
Can you read that for me one more time?
Uh-huh. And I put all the words I pulled out of the board goals in there, but we don't have to include all of them. So to the degree possible, funding priorities should also be informed with input and guidance from staff directly involved in teaching or coordinating specific content areas and programs. We could include some examples there, related to ensuring excellent, equitable, relevant, and engaging student learning experiences.
So, so one of the things I'm wondering about is how to operationalize that. And so in the conversations we've had so far this year about budget for next year has been how do we get input from folks and not have it feel like we are pitting basically one program against another one, and I've struggled with how to go about that. So I'm not opposed to the language, but I would need guidance and some support in terms of how you do that in such a way that it doesn't feel like we are running into that kind of situation. Does that make sense?
It does, and also not putting staff in a position of saying, okay, we're making budget decisions, who's getting cut out of your group?
Yeah.
But rather, I think when I've thought about this, and when educators have mentioned this in conversations, so that's what I'm pulling from is some conversations that have come to me in terms of, wouldn't it make sense to sit down and have some strategic plans of, to use music or libraries as to say, what are the things that we think are most important in prioritizing for what this would look like for children or students in elementary school or middle school or high school. So more of that strategic planning phase of what is it we would prioritize. I'm thinking back to the examples that we've been given several times around engaging science teachers or math teachers in thinking through what are the need to haves, the nice to haves, the really layering in what those priorities are in that way, which then helps, okay, we know what's most important, what they would prioritize if we could.
Yeah.
So that's where my thinking goes.
Can I just add on, or just not necessarily add on, but just say something about a suggestion? I think it's important to have people feel heard, and as somebody that does a lot of that kind of work in other realms of my life, it's one of the most frustrating things is where people give you all this information and you're like, thanks for the input, that's not what happens. And so being really clear if that ends up happening, or even if it's in the budget parameters, that it's super clear that just because somebody says this is a priority doesn't mean that necessarily is what's going to end up happening, because then it sets up the expectation from the community. They're like, why did I even say anything if you're not going to use it? And that's one of the most disappointing things. I feel like that happens when you invest a lot of time advocating for something and planning and contributing, and then you're like, why did I do all of that? You know what I mean? And I don't want staff to feel like their voices don't matter.
Yeah.
If that ends up, if that was the case of priorities and it didn't happen, and I worry that that might be the impact.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where my mind went to right away, was oh man, what if it doesn't happen? What they say this is the most important thing, and it was somebody else's important thing got prioritized over theirs.
Right.
And so I do worry about that part. I just wanted to kind of vocalize that.
I think that's important too.
I was involved in a conversation just this week where we were talking about the number of minutes for things like PE, music, and art, and then the conversation quickly shifted to reading in our K-3 classrooms, and we're really tight about the number of minutes we have for specials, but not as tight about the number of minutes we have for reading. And if we were as tight on that, it would probably have an impact on the number of specials we can provide. And so, again,
probably to those who would be engaged as well. And Lou, I also hear you in terms of sometimes asking the question and saying, well, we're asking, but we're not actually going to take your input, can be more detrimental and more harmful when that isn't actually followed through with. I think the thing that just stands out to me in terms of reading through the budget parameters is feeling like there isn't a specific mention that staff voice does matter in this process. And of course, we are really centering student experience as being absolutely critical and at the base of all decisions. That student experience being absolutely critical, and then having to negotiate around what's possible, what does the budget actually allow, what are the requirements with that funding as being prioritized, because it has to be, and just looking for some mention that staff voice is included as a valuable piece of information in that decision making. So I think that's just something that I would want to see reflected in some way or honored.
Well, and it's funny. It's interesting to me that you talked about the piece around data, because we talked about that too as a potential location for that as well. So I'm wondering if
And that may be, like you said, qualitative and quantitative data on student outcomes and student experience, including staff input or
Yeah.
guidance. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that too, Shauna, because it kind of veers away from like that idea of like, okay, I'm helping make a decision here, when it's where it's more around like centering their needs and experiences and stuff like that. And yeah, it would probably feel less performative. Yeah. Bernie, you had something on budget parameter, or are you done though, Shauna?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just probably because I'm new at this, and I don't think I was here for the first read, right? So we attended a couple of special board meetings where we talked about the importance of alignment all the way down, which should be guiding the ways and means to the outcomes. And I'm just wondering, process-wise, why is that not, why are board goals not specifically mentioned or incorporated by reference? Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think when we have developed our budget and when we share our budget, near the front of our budget document, there are a group of pages that are actually the pages I reference back to most commonly, and that's because there's examples of investments related to those board goals, and so it shows up there in the budget document quite well, I think. At least as the way I think about it, but you're right, it doesn't really show up here. So I guess with both your comment and yours, Shauna, I'm wondering if, there's multiple ways we can go about this. If there's amendments you want to make to still move it forward, or if you want us to go back and bring it back to you one more time with this additional input. And I'm open to either way of going about it. Well, at the end of the day, you get to say.
I was like, I feel like there's too many changes to do amendments.
Okay.
Like that would be like figuring out where to structure it and stuff like that. That's just personally what I think. I don't know if other board members agree, but it seems like this, and I do have a question of like, how will that impact the budget process if we if we wait till our next business meeting? Are we early enough?
Yeah, it won't. We
Okay.
just need these in place before the committee meets, so
Okay.
we can do it in February.
I think that would probably be more effective, unless like us trying to scramble to figure it out just so we can pass it.
So the two things that I'm taking back then, one is to highlight staff input, and the other is to highlight the way that the board goals are embedded throughout the budget. Yep. Okay. Yeah, and thank you.
And we're like, okay, can you add like 5 more minutes?
Thanks, Lauren.
Judah?
I have a requested amendment to JGAB before we pass it. Under definitions, paragraph 1, the definition of restraint, to close the quotes, first of all, and then if you added language, you would read fully. Restraint means the restriction of a student's actions or movement by holding the student or using pressure, or, this is the new part, limiting/removing a mobility assistance device or other means. And I felt that it was important that we clarify that limiting or removing a student's mobility assistance device is an effective restraint on the student, and should be guided by the remainder of the restraint policy.
I believe there's statutory definition in a bill that's passed 2 years ago, and I wonder if this definition is more, if there's any consequences of including this definition that may contradict with the definition used in the legislative definition. So that would be a curiosity and probably a need for consults on compliance with the legislation.
Yeah, because we would be changing a definition, I would prefer to like check with OSBA policy to make sure that we're okay with that.
I mean, I wouldn't object to that. I think that this is very important. I was actually originally a part of the drafting to the changes to the seclusion statute, and I had requested that change, and it was just shot down. But I think it's very important that it is known and in policy that removing a student's mobility assistance device is effectively restraining them, although physical pressure might not be applied to the student. They are effectively restrained.
I appreciate that distinction, Judah. And, yeah. You're gonna check on that one, Melissa?
Yeah, if you could give me what you wrote and then, thank you.
So we'll pull that one.
So we're
too.
gonna pull that. We won't be approving it tonight. Unless, I mean, I'm not saying that, but if that's what you.
No, that's what I was just saying, so
Okay.
we're pulling that one.
We're pulling it.
Yeah, that way we can check on that.
Okay,
and-
perfect, thank you.
I remember when I was like, when I was first looking at the policy.
Just wondering if then under the policy where the wording says the use of the following types of restraint on a student in the district is prohibited, that could be listed as an example there.
Well, I don't necessarily want, because those are blanket prohibitions under any circumstance, and sorry, this is also a special area of interest, that what's represented is potential use of lethal force against a student, because all the those could all result in death. And this would not result in death, but to make it known that this is a use of seclusion or restraint, and why I drafted the suggestion the way I did was to add it to the definition instead of having that fall under the blanket provision, the other means, because it's not clear, because this is not an actual use of force upon a student, that it is still a restraint. So hopefully we can hear back from legislative council on that.
Is that one that could possibly be like in like the little footnote, for example, you know what I mean? Where
That's
it's like,
Yeah,
where you can add it like that, because I
that's
think,
what I'm gonna find out, because where it says other means,
and
I
where
feel
that's footnoted,
like
what
that
other?
this is a definition of an other mean of restraint, but I'm sure Judah has something.
I do. I have a great many feelings on this because the removal of a mobility assistance device is not itself a use of force on the student, that still being categorized as a means of restraint without direct physical pressure, that I believe that it's important, but I will of course defer to the board majority, but in particular, you wanted to highlight that.
Thanks, Judah. And you apologized earlier. I don't think you should apologize for pointing things out and making sure we're keeping students centered in these policies. Just wanted to say that too. Okay, any other? Go ahead.
So again, I want to share the appreciation of the proposal, and maybe to frame the question in a way that might help us capture the intent of the amendments, I might want to add a few questions there, because I can, and similarly to how Title IX was different between the states and the federal, and we end up having two different processes, I think the proposal here is transformative policy. We're saying we're holding ourselves to a higher standard on what restraint means, as long as we capture that in a way where we say you have Oregon defined restraints, Corvallis School District defined restraints, and if it is the will of the board to divide the policy into these two tiers, then I can maybe want to propose framing the question, should we add this definition and make sure we're delineating that the reporting to ODE is based on their definition, so we're in compliance and also we're consistent with other districts and how they define it, if that makes sense.
Good, Bernie.
I'm just wondering, you mentioned earlier that you don't consider this an actual use of force type scenario. Is that what you're saying? If that is what you're saying, I'm just wondering if we should address this in a separate policy and just leave this as is.
So it was that this is not a direct application of physical force, as is every other type of physical restraint that and it's not a seclusion, because these can be removed while the student is still in a classroom. So that this is a very distinct type of restraint that does not involve direct application of physical force to the student, as we see in every other example. And the ODE did give us the blanket, the or other means. So if we're considering that this every single time is another means of restraint, I would like to see this being brought forward to the state level to recognize that removing a student's ability to move under any circumstances qualifies as a restraint, that we hold ourselves accountable in that way and report that data to ODE.
Go ahead, Trace.
So the other means was the part that was the reason I wanted to pull this out, because I feel like well, actually, I'm not going to say anything more because you've already said it so much better than I can. I think the other means language is problematic for consistent application of this. And to Sammy's point, if we are supposed to be applying this as a state standard, there is absolutely no guarantee that we have any reason to think that districts are interpreting this the same way. So I think the language is a problem, and it should go back. We should encourage OSBA to fix it. I don't think Corvallis School District should be the only place that addresses that. But I see that is so vague that any reporting we would do, there's no guarantee that we would be able to say that the interpretation of restraint and other means is being applied consistently anyway. So I don't know. That's my thought.
Do you have something?
So in the past, just kind of keep in mind in terms of policy and the way we've worked with policy, one of the things that came to mind for me was that Every Student Succeed Act, and the way we use the word Hakenkreuz rather than the word swastika, based on what we heard from families about the importance of that word to some religions. And so I think that there is the ability for us to go back and ask where definitions are there's similarities, but the words are different. In this case, it's a little bit beyond that, but we have delved into this before, and so I feel like it's totally appropriate for us to have the conversation, get the feedback, address do the questions that Judah has, and then come back with a recommendation for you. So I think I'm glad you brought it up because it is another specific example of what could be classified as a restraint. It just isn't in the language that they brought forward.
Thank you.
Teresa, was that everything for why you pulled it too? Okay. Before I asked for a motion, as a reminder, we pulled the budget parameters and policy JGAB, use of restraint and seclusion. The rest of the items in the packet are what we're voting on now. Would anybody like to make a motion? Sammy?
I move to approve consolidated action as proposed. As proposed. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry.
Would you like to restate your motion?
I move to approve consolidated action with the exception of
Budget parameters. Policy JAB.
JJB.
JGB.
I'm sorry.
my gosh,
Someone makes a motion.
You're so close. JJGAB.
No, there's only one J.
JJAB.
Is it JJ? It's JG, yeah.
It's okay.
Okay.
JGAB.
I thought you said
JGAB.
We're going to need that again. How you're going to capture it. You want to go for a third?
Someone save me.
Second the motion to approve consolidated action with the exception of JGAB and the budget parameters.
I will second that revision to the second.
I thought it was already seconded. That was, yeah, okay, the second to the second. Okay. Y'all are, okay. It has been moved by Sammy and seconded by Judah to adopt the consolidated action items with the exception of budget parameters and policy JGAB. I have it in front of me, so it's. Is there any further discussion? Okay. Has been moved by Sammy and seconded by Judah to adopt the consolidated action items with the exception of budget parameters and policy JGAB, use of restraint and seclusion. Bernie?
Aye.
Sammy?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Shauna?
Aye.
Therese?
Aye.
Judah?
Aye.
And I vote aye. Motion passes unanimously. And the next item on the agenda is consolidated information. As a reminder, the items under this portion of the agenda are for discussion. Would anyone like to discuss an item in consolidated information? I think Chris had one too. Chris?
So I apologize if I'm misreading this, but in,
Oh wait,
G-
just tell me which one it is first.
oh, yeah, sorry, just want, JHFE/GBNAB
Okay.
-AR.
Oh, the AR, okay. Sammy?
I would like to pull out the November 2024 financial summary unaudited for a question. Bless you.
Okay.
And also,
Okay, go ahead.
and also EBC proposed, and also EBCA proposed, and EBC and EBCA existing.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So the first one, it was, the policy JHFE GBNAB-AR reporting of suspected abuse of a child.
And I apologize if I'm misreading this, but at the very end of the first paragraph, it says, any district employee who has reasonable cause to believe that any person with whom the employee is in contact has abused a child should immediately report. And then,
It should be I'm sorry, it should be a period after report.
should it say report?
Oh, I'm sorry, it shouldn't do that.
It feels,
I
I
crossed
feel
out too
like
many
it,
things. It should say, I will adjust this for second read. It should read, the employee is in contact, has abused a child, shall immediately report in the same manner, period.
yeah, I just felt like there was something missing there.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else on that one? Go ahead, Sammy.
Sorry, I just noticed that. Is the language as it reads only for in contact if the employee hears in second hand of an incident suspected of child abuse? I believe that qualifies for mandatory reporter, but is the language here captures that? Because I don't read it that way. They're mandating that you have to be in contact. Am I right?
When I read, if you believe that any child with whom an employee comes into contact with has suffered abuse, that to me seems like the mandatory report. Yeah, it's, what sounds different to you?
Well, it sounds different to me that this says if the employee comes in contact with the student or the child, they learn about child abuse, they have to report it.
Yes.
What if an employee comes in contact with the third party? The third party discloses a child so-and-so was subject to abuse
By a whole other person.
by a whole other person.
So a third-party report, I don't think is mentioned in here, no.
and
And you're asking, is that a mandatory report?
correct.
I'm
A
pretty sure
third
that,
party? Yeah,
I'm pretty sure if somebody discloses, like,
Yeah.
that I know. Let's ask Judah.
I think it's if you know or have reason to know that a child is being abused, essentially you must
You must do.
report
Okay.
with the information that you have available.
Right?
And that's what I see at on top of the second paragraph. Any district employee who has reasonable cause. So to believe.
Yeah, to believe that a student has been subjected to abuse and must report. So if you look in the second paragraph
Second paragraph.
instead of the first.
Right at the top, any district employee who has reasonable cause to believe that another district employee, contractor, agent, volunteer, or student has engaged in abuse, or that the student has been subject to abuse.
Somebody else that they heard from a child, I still have to report it. But this is saying that if we're hearing of any abuse made by, like, a volunteer.
So there's two different kinds of policies here. This policy is focusing on the actual reporting of the child abuse. And I see where you're coming from. You're saying it's not clear enough about what a mandatory report is, and a mandatory report is taken care of in a different policy. This is focused solely on how you do the reporting and what happens following the reporting. So I can pull that other policy for you to make sure that it exists there. Agency or centralized hotline.
Would it help just to put in there that this is not in place of that policy or
What I can do
something?
is cross-reference that policy at
Yeah.
the top. If you would like me to add that, I will.
That might be
Okay.
helpful to have that distinction since they.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's a problem we're going to continue to run into, Chris, just, you know, is that the statute that this is based on is not that great.
I have a question real quick. Does this impose an additional duty on employees and everybody else to make a secondary report beyond the DHS report?
No.
Okay. I guess I was misreading it. Okay.
It gives you options. You can use the centralized reporting system or law enforcement. And there's always, not only is that required, but they also file a report that we hold on to. So those are the two duties to report that we have in the district. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'll add that cross-reference.
Do you have something on this one?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just came up for me. So this refers to any employee in the district. What about volunteers?
It's listed in
including,
there.
is it?
Oh,
Okay.
do volunteers have the responsibility?
Yet not as,
Put them into two categories: the financial and the package of EBC. Where is it?
The EBC ones?
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
So, would you like me to start with the financial?
Yeah, sure.
So the question for the financials in November is, there is in the first line pound signs or hashtags. I'm assuming this is an Excel sheet cell size.
Yeah, I just realized that. So we can replace that tomorrow, right? The page in the packet? Yeah, it just, the conversion from Excel to PDF
Yep.
apparently didn't go well. Sorry.
No worries. Well, that caught my eyes, and I'm wondering if you have any insights why the tax revenue, local property tax revenue, and other local sources is forecasted to come shorter than budgeted. Is there any insight about that? It's like about $300,000 combined, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, but the difference on the local property tax revenue, I mean, when you look at it as a percentage, it's not super significant. What I would say is that the local property tax revenue across the state this year has been coming in lower, just from anecdotal information of talking with colleagues and others. And it's just the difference in assessed value didn't grow as much as it has the last few years. So then, since everything's based on that assessed value, you just receive a little bit less. But again, we are making an estimate based on trends, and it was just a little under the average. I'm not super concerned about the 112. That does have an impact on compression. And so then, like for local option levy, we're actually able to bring in a little bit more. So if you look at the difference between those two, it's even less.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
No further questions.
Okay. Anybody else have questions on the financials since it was pulled? Okay. Thank you. Are you pulling these all for the same reason? Is that why you said to lump them, or two separate things?
There's two separate questions, one specific to EBC, and the
Okay.
second question, sorry, I'm going to say it's a Pandora box about the change of EBCA policy, the combined. Now the proposal is to delete that and to add two EBC and EBCA. So it's a question that captures them all, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I'll start with the first simple question on EBC. My question or curiosity is, there's a requirement here for every 60 students enrolled that we would have first aid, CPR, AED card. And I'm wondering, in the same vein for this plan, if there is any value in writing access to Narcan in school buildings. in a way that we ensure that it is available by policy. Is that something could fit here?
It could, but we have it in other policies too. And in February, the nurses are bringing forward a whole pile of new health-related policy that include reference to Narcan, that include liability around that doesn't exist for our staff if we use it, all of the, and our students, all of those things. So those will all be coming in February, and the nursing team will bring those. So it is mentioned in 2 other places.
Wonderful, thank you. So the second question is related to the deleted deleted policy about emergency procedures and disaster plan. And I remember that we passed this in 2020. We called it district emergency plan with minimum expectations, and the minimum expectations were listing 12 requirements. The way I see it, that we're moving that part into the new EBCA, deferring to, is it ABCA or no ABC?
Yeah, because EBCB is about drills, emergency drills. So
Yes.
EBCA is safety threats.
Safety threats. So for the safety threats, we have minimum expectations of communication, which is great. We have a deferral to ODE, I believe, somewhere here on the requirements for a district disaster plan. And I'm wondering, why shouldn't we retain the same list of requirements that we had in EBC, EBCA, the 12 requirements for the plan? Because I think, like, we thought about, it was very thoughtful and detailed, and
Okay.
it was appropriate for the times.
Yes.
So
I wasn't around for this one.
Okay.
So did the board create these 12 items, or did this just come kind of boilerplate from OSBA?
it came from OSBA. Okay.
I'm happy to reach out and ask about those, and if those are, if the consensus of the board is that they want something like this added.
Yes, I would propose for including it, and I'm going to say, while the policy should be really high level and say this is what we need to accomplish, I believe it's really helpful to stipulate either in the ARs or in the policy, like this is a checklist of what the plan should entail. So yeah, it does help us not to miss an element, and I think those 12 elements are really helpful for a variety of the types of disasters. So that's my recommendation, if that's the will of the board.
Is it?
I'm looking around. Everybody's looking around at each other.
Well, I have a question then. Like, did you use this during COVID? Like, must have had to do a lot of this when you were doing all the amazing work you did during the pandemic and before, as things were getting going.
We did all of this, but most of all of what we did was very much directed by ODE and OHA.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't turn to this policy during that time. I was being given direction from ODE and OHA.
So are you going to look into,
Yeah, I can
Okay.
absolutely do
Okay.
that. I will do it. Okay, thank you.
all right, thank you. Okay, what's the next one? Is the A or the B?
Oh, sorry, I mentioned them all because they were all together. They're all together, so they're deleted from one and they're referenced differently in others, so that's
Okay,
why.
so you didn't have anything else from any of those? Does anybody else? I did on the emergency procedures and drills, the EBCB. I think it would be kind of nice to see in our policy that, I know it's saying what we will do, but it doesn't have like that we won't do simulated active shooter.
Oh, okay.
I would appreciate seeing that, knowing the harm that they've caused in other districts across the country.
Okay.
If that's okay with you all. Okay.
So we will not do simulated drills.
Can Can I ask a question about
Mhm.
that? So there have been simulations that the county has done, not during school time, but using school facilities
Mhm.
to practice. Are you saying no to that?
Those
or
are, this
during-
policy's for students.
Just for the student?
Yeah, so I just don't think they should be witnessing each other pretend get shot,
I
is all.
totally agree.
Yeah, that's why I was like, I think we all are, but it'd be nice to have it reflected in our policy.
Just follow up on that though. Is it the sense of the board that we don't even talk about it, or do a tabletop type
What do you mean?
drills for the
Oh, no,
for
they have,
addressing that?
they have
or-
drills and they talk about it, but
Right.
some schools in other parts of the country actually simulate shootings
Right.
with the fake
Okay.
blood and stuff, and I don't think we should.
So you're talking specifically about the active
That's what the simulated drills are.
simulated
Yeah,
drills and not tabletop
not the actual,
exercises or
no,
something like that.
those are
Okay,
super important.
Great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
That, I just want to mention too that that 12 item list is kind of, it's very specific to pandemic. I know it says other catastrophes on there. So, so if we want to stay specific to the pandemic issues that are listed there, that's fine. I just want to point that out.
Thank you. I would encourage an all-hazard approach for sure. So I would support the all-hazard approach. So any dimensions you can get from those 12 items that could be applicable for all-hazard, I would support that personally. Thanks.
Thanks. Oh my gosh, I didn't even see we're over on this topic. I'm so good at that usually. But we are on time though. We're back on track. Somehow we were ahead. We were super ahead. Now we're right on. Now we're right on the thing. So we're, last item on the agenda is board member comments. Does anybody have comments? I have comments, but I'll go last. Did you have your hand up, Judah?
I did.
Okay.
I'd like to thank County Commissioner Gabe Shepard for attending our meeting this evening. And on this emergency response that we've just been discussing, note a local resource, the Community Emergency Response Team, which is a free combination of educational service and opportunity to volunteer in the community. And information can be found through the City of Corvallis website, and I think also through the county. So it is free of charge. They provide lots of free materials, and since we're just talking about emergency response, just make it known that's in the community and it is free of charge.
Other board member comments? Do you have your hand up, Sammy? Mhm.
So, Chair, I have two comments. The first one we discussed earlier, and again, usually we don't acknowledge the audience, but I want to acknowledge Commissioner Shepard and thank him for sticking around for a while. And in that vein, we discussed the interjurisdictional coordination and liaisoning. I want to acknowledge that Ryan, as our superintendent, has been phenomenal in making sure that the working relationship with leaders across the community and the region is there, and that did help a lot in many operational and strategic initiatives. And at the same time, I think liaisoning on the policy level and elected officials level would be really helpful for constituents and for us to have alignment in understanding what are the goals and shared interests and how other jurisdictions support others. We have seen it in a different angle, but with the foundation, how meeting together annually and then biannually have increased our ability to achieve our mutual goals. And in similar vein, I would recommend any approach for the leadership to consider to strengthen that, whether annual or every 2 years meeting with jurisdictions we interact with, our students benefit from and staff benefit from, or whatever model that could really help us on an elected officials level, while we continue to support and advocate for the superintendent's leadership that he continues to do. So that's my first comment, and I would defer to board leadership into how to drive this conversation. The other comment I really referenced earlier is related to our students and families who are undocumented. I want to really appreciate Ryan for making that statement earlier, and for the resolutions that still continue to be in place that the board passed in 2016, and the consequent reaffirmations and trainings and facts for our community. That being said, the anxiety is really high, and we want to assure our students and families we got their back, And part of walking the walk around that, I want to share really my genuine, serious concern about the Lake and Riley Act. It's basically the way I would describe it. If a person is accused before the trial happens and the accusation is considered deemed to be true or not, that person may be detained by the Homeland Security officials if this act passes federally. And also, state attorney generals will have the capacity to prosecute the Homeland Security if they don't detain those people, even if the only problem is they are accused. They're not necessarily have seen their day in justice. So there are so many unintended consequences to that for folks being wrongly accused and then detained by Homeland Security. I know my understanding of the sanctuary laws that we have in Oregon prevents that, and this act is in contradict to that. Right now it's in the Senate side, and having passed with bipartisan supports in the House side, make me wonder what kind of advocacy we need to elevate, because what I'm hearing from community members is really an anxiety about this act, and frankly, talking about it, not those who are impacted the most potentially by it, don't have a voice, but still consider them our constituents. So anything we can do to continue reassure our community that we're going to support them, support their privacy, and support the Supreme Court's rulings in the past around protecting them will be really important. But also seeing the unintended consequences of this, just holding the due process that's we hold ourselves to, and not using state and local resources for federal offenses or immigration law violations is something that we've been doing for a while, and this could really reverse all of that.
Thank you, Sammy. Any other board members have comments? No? Okay. Everybody already thanked Commissioner Shepard for being here. That was on the top of my list. But thank you for taking the time to hear what's going on with the district and with the board here. Appreciate that. And I was gonna similarly say something about the act, and I'm pulling up the actual name of it because I'm like, the Riley Lakin Act. Yes, thank you. And how it's in direct opposition of decisions that this board has made in the past to support undocumented students. It's in direct opposition of the state sanctuary laws, and also in direct opposition of the statement that the school district has just reissued to our community here. And so I just wanted to reiterate what Sammy said, and also express disappointment that it was passed as well, since this board has voted on matters in the past already and continues to support students in our district and families. So
I gave it to you in the wrong order. It's Lake and Riley.
Lake and Riley, thank you. Yeah. With that being said, I also wanted to say again, thanks for the staff for being here all late with us, and happy back to school after winter term, after I said something really sad. But I do want to say thanks for all the work that you all do. And with that, what time is it? 8:57. The meeting is adjourned.